So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on nocturnal animals, special for Halloween, by our own Shannon Burke, who is Marin County Parks Interpretive Naturalist, a wonderful speaker, very knowledgeable about the flora and fauna in Marin. So I'm always pleased to partner with Shannon on these talks. So we are recording this program, so it will be viewable later. It's typically up within 2 weeks on our YouTube website. If you have any trouble with that, you can email me, but you can find it on the YouTube channel if you just type in Marin County Free Library. And I'm just going to ask everyone to stay muted throughout the program. There'll be time for questions at the end. You can put them in the chat and I'll read them out and Shannon will answer. So with that, good morning, everyone. And Shannon, tell us all about nocturnal animals.
Thanks, Shireen. As always, it is wonderful to partner with Shireen and Corte Madera Library. So thanks for doing all the behind the scenes logistics and all of that stuff, Shireen. So happy Halloween, everyone. And thanks for joining us today. I am Shannon Burke. I'm the Interpretive Naturalist with Marin County Parks. And I do things like this. I do webinars and lectures. And then I also typically lead 1 or 2 walks a week. And then in our agency, we also have ranger-led activities and volunteer days. So if you want to learn more, check us out at marincountyparks.org. So today we are going to talk about nocturnal animals. And in the past, I've done some lectures on wildlife. And so I'm not really going to go into the specifics of different species, but today we're actually going to focus on some of the adaptations that nocturnal animals have. And so, you know, when we're asleep in our houses, the things that are creeping and crawling and going bump in the night, how are they doing that? And my slides aren't advancing. There we go. Okay, so first off, before we dive in, kind of do a little bit of a glossary here, definitions. So if an animal is day active, it's considered diurnal. And then crepuscular means that an animal is the most active kind of around dusk and dawn. And then cathemeral means that it could be active during the day or at night. So it kind of depends on when it's looking for food or when it's having social interactions, things like that. And then nocturnal are animals that are active at night. So for the purposes of today's talk, we're kind of going to lump crepuscular, cathemeral, and nocturnal all under the category of nocturnal because they're active when it's dark. Okay, so what are some of the advantages of being nocturnal? If you think about there are so many animals in the world and a lot of them are active during the day. So why do some choose to be more active at night? So if you think about it, during the day, temperatures can rise and it can get pretty hot out and day active animals have to deal with that, right? And so here's a squirrel. You guys may have seen this. This behavior is called splooting. And so what's going on here is on hot days, squirrels will kind of collapse on a fence or on a railing or on a branch or something like that. And what they're doing is they're actually heat dumping. So they're getting as much surface area of their bodies against a substrate, which is cooler, and then they can sort of transfer some of their heat to that object. So anyway, so nocturnal animals don't really have to deal with that as much. It tends to be cooler at night. The other thing is, because temperatures are cooler, there are animals that really need kind of high water requirements. And so if they are active at night, there's less chance that they might dry out. And then if you think about something like a bat, right, that's flying through the air and it's eating insects, it's catching insects, it's not competing with day active animals like these swallows that are basically filling the same niche. So in the animal world, a lot of times you have a similar niche that somebody is filling during the day and somebody is filling during the night, and yet they're not directly competing with each other. And then also, you might have a better chance of finding food while some other animals are sleeping. So for instance, this little mouse might have a better chance of finding an acorn while the squirrels and the scrub jays are asleep, right? And then at night, the air is stiller. Things just get kind of quieter. And also, if you think about how much noise humans make, we get quieter at night. And so things are quieter, and that can help animals to find prey. So for instance, this bobcat might have an easier time of hearing a little mouse or some other animal moving around at night. And then also, you know, some animals might have a better chance of sort of escaping predation under the cover of darkness. They can kind of slip into the shadows, and they might have a chance of escaping something that during the day might be able to catch them, or if they were out active during the day. But it's kind of interesting. So, okay, when we think about the nighttime, we often think about the moon, right? And so the moon goes through these different phases. And for a really long time, it was believed that during the full moon, animals were less active because they were potentially more easily seen, and so they could be more vulnerable to prey, right? So about 10 years ago or so, some researchers looked at about 60 different studies that were done on nocturnal animals, and they looked at all of that data, and they realized that that's not actually always the case. And so especially in some habitats like forested habitats, small mammals are actually more active during full moons. And that's because they can better see predators coming for them. So before I go to the next slide, I just want to point out, I love this photo. So this photo is taken by an award-winning photographer who also happens to be an evolutionary biologist. And this is this long exposure night photography. That's really just wonderful. This little mouse gazing at the moon. Anyway, so if you have prey animals that are able to see better on a full moon, and when the moon is brighter around the time of a full moon, and be able to sense predators coming. Conversely, this study also showed that predators were actually less active when the moon was brighter. And then just because it's Halloween, we have to include scorpions in this talk. And scorpions have an interesting interaction with the moon. So they have, centipedes do this as well. They're able to fluoresce under UV light. And so what's going on is in the centipedes, they have this substance that's in their skin, and it absorbs ultraviolet rays. And so if you think about it, the sun is hitting the moon. And so when we are looking at moonlight, that's actually reflected sunlight, right? So it's sunlight that's bouncing off the moon back onto the earth. And so these animals, these scorpions, actually absorb that UV light, and it sends a signal to their brain. So in a way, they're actually seeing with their whole bodies. And how they're able to use that is if they are exposed to moonlight, they're going to be more visible to a predator, right? And so as long as this faint ultraviolet light is hitting their bodies, they're going to glow. And so it may help them maneuver themselves back into the shadows or back under the cover so they're not as vulnerable. Okay, so how do animals navigate in the dark? There are a lot of different ways, and so we are going to dive into that. So one of the main things is during the night, the air is more still, there's more moisture in the environment, and so odors are more concentrated and they linger much more than in the day, where they kind of get blown away by breezes and dissipated more readily. So it can be a really great way for, if you have a strong sense of smell, which most nocturnal animals do, during the nighttime, you can be able to track your prey better. And then also, you might be able to discern if there's another animal in your territory, like a rival, or in the case of coyotes, if you have a coyote that's wandering around looking for a territory, it might be able to sense that there's already a pack or an established pair in this area. And it can also be a great way of finding a mate. So if you have a strong sense of smell, you can pick up the traces that other animals have left behind. So if you think about foxes like this is another fabulous photo from that photographer. So foxes are notorious, and a lot of animals do this, but foxes are really notorious for leaving scent markings, for really marking their territory with scat and with urine. And in urine, you've got pheromones and chemicals, and it's conveying an enormous amount of information. So humans don't have a great sense of smell, so it's hard for us to really understand this, but there's so much information being conveyed in the animal world through scent. So for instance, a pair of foxes will mark their territory, but it's also how they might find a mate. So they may be able to tell if this other animal that has left these chemical cues, what gender it is, if it's in breeding condition, all of these things. And I just want to note that not only do they have these scent markings and things like that, but this photo shows that these foxes have dragged up this skeleton of a fawn. And apparently, at least in part of their range, breeded pairs do this, or mated pairs do this, and they'll pull up small skeletons like rabbits or fawns and kind of decorate trees with them. And they might use them to provide platforms so they can sleep in the trees, but it also may be a visual cue to other foxes that there is a mated pair in the area. All right, so it's not just mammals that have a good sense of smell and use olfactory cues. So do some other animals. So things like lungless salamanders, like this arboreal salamander. You can see these lines that go from the lip up to the nose area, right? And so these lines are actually filled with glands that take sensory cues and directly transmit it to the brain. And so as this animal is moving around, it can pick up cues from the substrate and gather a great deal of information, maybe about prey or, again, a potential mate. And then even things like moths have a really good sense of smell. So a lot of flowers that are pollinated by moths have really strong scents at night. They become more odorous at night. The scent is stronger. And so moths can pick up on those chemical cues with their antennae. And then in some species like this Ceanothus silk moth, which is found here in this area, they're nocturnal, so we don't see them too frequently. The males have these amazing antennae. And so these antennae of moths are actually sort of amplifying the chemical cues. They have cells in the antennae. And so they are really navigating in a lot of ways by a sense of smell, including finding a mate. And so males have to discern the very faint pheromone signals that are, being wafted on the air by females and differentiate or kind of sense those above a lot of other competing smells. It can also be a great way for animals to find sort of unexpected foods. So some things like raccoons and foxes and coyotes and opossum, all of these are omnivores and they have a really varied diet. And they take advantage of vegetables and fruits that are available in different seasons, including the holiday season. And then there's also the world of touch. So if you think about it, if we're trying to fumble around a dark room, we tend to put our hands out in front of us and feel around, right? So animals that are active at night in the dark are also doing that. But one of the main ways they're doing that is with their whiskers. And so some animals like this river otter that's spending time in dark waters, seals also have really big whiskers. This helps them navigate in the dark. And so there are all of these nerve endings that are associated with whiskers. And things like rodents, like mice and rats, are actually whisker specialists. So they have these really long whiskers. Their whiskers are incredibly sensitive. They have something like 25,000 nerve cells on their face associated with these whiskers. So the whisker is basically a hair. It comes down into a follicle, and those follicles are innervated with all of these nerve cells. And then they just immediately send a signal to the brain. So if you think about the life of a rodent, they are going in and out of small spaces in the dark a lot, right? So they're getting into little cracks and crevices. And if they're trying to get away from a predator, they have to make a decision really quickly. Can they fit through that hole? And even, is there a space beyond that hole? So if they can quickly sort of stick their face in, they can judge the size of the hole and how big that space is beyond that opening. Which can mean life or death if something's chasing them, right? And so similarly, something like a bobcat also has whiskers, And they can really use these to capture prey. So if they are getting close to their prey and they're kind of right on top of them, and like I said, this mouse or a rat is making, really quick movements, they'll actually sort of push their whiskers forward, and they're getting a great deal of information through those whiskers, which again is immediately being transmitted to their brain. And then I just had to do this for Halloween. Anyway, so another animal that has a great sense of touch are raccoons. On their front feet, they have 4 times as many sensory receptors as they do on their hind feet. And also their cerebral cortex, an enormous amount of their cerebral cortex, which is the part of the brain that is associated with interpreting tactile sensations. That part of their brain, a lot of it is basically in relation to their hands or their front feet. And so if you watch raccoons, they use their hands a lot. And when they're foraging, sometimes they'll even be looking up and looking around as they're doing something with their hands. And sometimes they'll bring food to water and they'll use water on it. And it's not that they're washing it, they're actually getting that much more tactile information when it's wet, so they can tell what something is, if it's safe to eat, things like that. And then even spiders. Spiders are animals too, right? And they're covered in hairs. So nocturnal spiders like this turret spider, in the dead of night, they can pick up air and soil-borne vibrations with these little hairs all over their body and detect if prey is going past their little retreat. Okay, but vision obviously is one of the major senses and adaptations that nocturnal animals have, which is superior to ours, superior to a lot of diurnal animals. And so all nocturnal animals, well, I should say most nocturnal animals have really good vision. So what's going on here? How is it different from ours or from other animals that are more active during the day? So we're going to look at a couple drawings here because I think this is kind of the easiest way to understand this. And a lot of you may already be familiar with this. But if you look at the eye, on the left-hand side here, you've got the iris and the pupil. And so that's where light enters. It comes in through the pupil, and then it hits the back of the eye, which is the retina. And the retina is covered in these cells that are photoreceptors, meaning they receive light, right? And so you have rods and cones, and cones are really responsible for helping with daylight vision and perceiving color. And rods are super, super sensitive to light. And so diurnal animals have a higher ratio of cones to rods, and nocturnal animals have a higher ratio of rods to cones. So it's not just this ability to pick up light better or to perceive color better. It's also, if you look at the shape of the eye, the different structures in a nocturnal animal, the lens tends to be a lot bigger and the cornea. And so that is just increasing the detail that they can see in really dim light. And so those rods are helping them to, the rods basically take in light and magnify it. So nocturnal animals are able to perceive much more light than we do. And then these other structures like the lens and the cornea really help them see detail in that dim light. So if you look at a mouse, which is nocturnal over here on the left, and then a dog, which could be active during the day or at night. And so this would include things in the dog family like coyotes and foxes and wolves. And then over on the right, you have humans, which are active during the day. And so our lens is much smaller and the cornea is much smaller. So this is the case in mammals. It's also the case in birds. So swans, hawks, and owls are all pretty big birds. They have large eyes. And again, you can see this difference in the size of the lens and the size of the cornea. On the right is the owl. And I realize this image isn't very sharp, but you can make out that it's got this very large cornea and a large lens. Okay, so I'm sure most of you have seen this. If you ever hear, something out in your yard and you flip on the light, or you take a flashlight and shine it out there, you might see these 2 glowing eyes looking back at you. So a lot of nocturnal animals present this look if a bright light is shining on them. And what's going on here is that another drawing for you guys. We already talked about the retina. The retina is where the cones and the rods are. And then behind that, in some nocturnal animals, is this other layer, which is called the tapetum lucidum. And it's made up of little crystals, like mineral crystals. And so they're actually kind of iridescent and reflective. So what's going on is the light comes in through the pupil, it hits the retina. The retina absorbs as much light as possible from those rods and cones, but some of it passes through and then it hits the tapetum. And that acts kind of like a mirror that actually reflects the light back through the retina, giving those rods in the retina a second chance to absorb that light to enable the animal to see even better. But sometimes not all of it is absorbed. And so especially if, like, for instance, you shine a flashlight straight at an animal, that's a lot of light going into the eye. So not all of it's going to be absorbed. And so it ends up going back out the same way it came in, through the pupil. And so when we see eye shine at night, that's actually the light being reflected off of that mirror-like layer in the eye, the tapetum. So different animals have different colored tapetums. And if you're a super savvy biologist out doing night surveys, you can potentially identify animals by the color of their tapetum. That can be helpful. So a lot of, and these photos don't really show the different colors very well, but it can be white, it can be yellow, it can be green, it can be red. And even frogs do this. So this can be a way to go out and find frogs at night, and even spiders. So a lot of different animals have this reflective eye shine. Okay, so, but when we talk about vision in nocturnal animals, owls really just are pretty amazing. And so in general, birds have the largest eyes in relation to their body size of any animals in the animal world. And so what this means is that, I'm gonna go back here. Okay, so birds have these really large eyes. Owls have really, really big eyes. And there isn't much room for muscles in there. And so we can, without moving our heads, we can look to the left, we can look to the right, we can look up, we can look down. Birds can't really do that. And so most birds can't. And so they end up moving their heads, and that's how they scan their environment. And so one of the reasons why they're able to have such flexibility of moving their heads is, opposed to mammals, if you look at the base of the skull of a mammal, there are these two sort of bumps, right? And that's what sits on top of the spine. And in birds, there's just one. And so they can actually rotate their head. It's kind of like a ball and pivot mechanism. So they have a lot more flexibility. They can just move their head around a lot more. And owls are pretty exceptional at this. So an owl can move its head 270 degrees about, right? And so it can be looking straight, it can look over its right-hand shoulder, it can look over its back, it can flip its head around and look over its left-hand shoulder. And if you grew up watching cartoons, you may have thought that they could just spin their heads around and around and around. Obviously they can't, there is a limit, but they have incredible flexibility. So they can move their heads on the sort of horizontal plane back and forth. They can also twist their heads upside down. And this, just because they aren't able to move their eyes, this helps them really kind of figure out what something is. If they're looking at something and they can't quite figure it out, you'll see owls do this, which is just adorable. You could spend hours online looking at photos of especially burrowing owls with their heads upside down. Anyway, okay, so all of that is going on. And on top of that, they have more vertebrae in their necks. And so birds can have a wide range. I think some even have up to like 24 or something. But anyway, owls have 14. So if you compare them to humans, they have twice as many bones, even though if you think about an owl, they don't look particularly long-necked, right? They kind of look short-necked. But this allows them to have all of that flexibility. And if you think about it, you've got blood going up through the neck into the brain. And so these arteries actually on an owl kind of are at the top of the neck, they're kind of on the outside of the bones. And so they don't get pinched when the owl turns its head. And Also at the base of the skull, there are these reservoirs where they have sort of these pools of blood, so that if the blood does temporarily get cut off, you still have a supply of blood to the brain. Okay, so owls are pretty amazing in a lot of different ways, but they also have exceptional hearing. So a lot of nocturnal animals have really good hearing, but owls have really acute hearing, much more so than most day active raptors. So part of what's going on here is, if you think of an owl, if you think of the face, they've got these big facial discs. They've got these sort of radiating feathers around their eyes. And that helps to, keep their face kind of flat, so their vision is obscured. Their bills are fairly flat, and so that also helps them with their vision. But also what's going on is these radial discs, these radiating feathers kind of act like satellite dishes, and it's actually funneling sound to the ear openings. And so the ear openings are right behind the eyes, and in most owls, they're actually asymmetrical. So here's an image of a skull of a barn owl, it's very exaggerated in barn owls, the asymmetry, but this helps them triangulate. So they're able to narrow in on a sound a lot more easily than you and I would able to be. And then this allows owls to have these just incredible hearing, but barn owls are really, really superior. Barn owl hearing is so good that in studies, like in laboratory studies, they have shown that barn owls can capture prey in almost complete darkness. So they are capturing prey just through their hearing, this incredible hearing. The other thing is, if you think about it, if they are flying around in the still of night, they don't want their prey to hear them coming, right? So owls also have these specialized feathers, and it's mostly on their flight feathers and then the coverts of their wings. And the top of it has this velvety nap. If any of you have ever felt an owl feather before, they're super soft. And so that helps to muffle the sound as the feathers are rubbing against each other. If any of you have ever had like a raven or a turkey vulture or a big day active bird fly past you, you can hear the whoosh of its wings, right? With an owl, that doesn't happen. So it's got this velvety nap, and then on the leading edge, it's sort of this comb that kind of cuts through the air and helps reduce sound. And then on the trailing edge, you get this fringed edge, which kind of acts like a muffler, basically. And so their feathers are super, super quiet. So not only does it keep prey from hearing them coming, but they're also not interfering with themselves. They're not making a bunch of noise. So this means that they can better hear their prey. So if you think about, if you're wearing a raincoat or something, as you're whooshing around, it can be hard to hear things, right? So with owls, they're not having that interference from their own feathers. Okay, so owls aren't the only ones that have ways of keeping quiet during the night. A lot of animals basically can, like even something as big as a mountain lion can walk past almost silently. They'd be really, really quiet. And one of the reasons is because a lot of nocturnal animals have these soft pads, and then they have pretty dense fur in between their pads. So even like your house cat has this, right? Dogs have it. Different breeds of dogs have more or less hair, but they have it as well. And then again, just in general, all nocturnal animals have really, really good hearing. And so they're able to hear their prey in the dark or hear a predator coming. But bats kind of take this to a higher level. So as folks know, bats use something called echolocation to find prey, to navigate during the night. And they're actually not the only animals that do. And so another name for this is called biosonar. And things like whales and dolphins use this in the water. Even animals like some birds that are cave-dwelling birds. And it's even believed that rats may use echolocation to some extent. And then also very small mammals that are like shrews that are related to moles. They kind of look like little mice, but they're not rodents, they're insectivores. And so they are basically tunneling through soil, which is a dark environment, and trying to find prey. And so all of these animals are basically, echolocation is sending out a sound into the environment, and that sound bounces off an object and comes back to the source. It's echoed back. So all of these animals are using it this way, but bats really are specialists in this. And so they're able to navigate in the dark as they're flying around. They're able to not run into things, and they're also able to find things to eat. So how does this work? So it starts off in the larynx of a bat, and the bat's larynx has these thin membranes that are specialized to make these really, really high-pitched sounds. And so it sends out a pulse of sound that is emitted through either the mouth or the nose. In most species, it's through the mouth. And then that travels through the air, it hits an object, and then it bounces back to the bat. And the bat has these huge ears that are forward facing, they're funnel shaped. They kind of look like satellite dishes again. And then in some species, they've got these little ear flaps that may help direct the sound back into their eyes, or into their ears. And then that signal is immediately translated to the brain, and they form a mental image, basically. And so they're kind of seeing their environment through these sounds. And so when they're out searching, it might be 10 pulses per second. If they detect something, if something flies by and they're like, "Ooh, I think that could be dinner," they speed it up a little bit. So they do 25 to 50 pulses per second. And then when they really narrow in on something, they can be emitting these pulses up to about 200 pulses per second. And so that's super fast, right? And amazingly, with that many pulses, they are actually able to tell detail like how big the object is, if it's moving, what direction it's moving, the speed that it's moving, and they can even tell texture. So that can help them to differentiate between particular prey items, for instance. So what's happening is they're emitting these really strong, high-pitched signals, but they're also listening in their environment, right? And so how do they avoid not deafening themselves with these really high-pitched bursts of sound that they're emitting, and they have these very delicate ears? So what happens is they actually temporarily deafen themselves while they're emitting sound. And so just before they emit this sound, they have these tiny muscles in their ears, and they contract those muscles, and it blocks the sound. And then once they've emitted the sound, they relax those muscles, and then they can hear again. And they have really, really good hearing. And so they're able to hear that sound bouncing back, right? And then they'll emit a sound again with their ears closed. And so when they're narrowing in on a prey item, if they're doing 200 pulses per second, they are opening and closing those muscles, their ears. They're contracting those muscles at an incredibly high rate. And so that frequency can equal the same amount of pulses per second, basically, right? Which is one of the highest frequencies of muscle movement in the animal world. But of course, evolution happens. And so insects have evolved defenses. And so some insects are able to hear. They have, what could be considered ears, different structures on different parts of their bodies. And some it's on their abdomen, and some it's on their legs. And so some insects have the ability to actually hear those ultrasonic clicks that the bats are making, and they can respond. So they can fold their wings and just drop to the ground, or they can quickly spiral to the ground. And if the bat is anticipating the flight path of that animal, if it suddenly drops down, then it can overshoot and miss it. So some animals are able to do that. And then some animals are able to actually produce clicks. These little insects can click, and in some cases, this is especially true in moths, where they may be a toxic species. And so they're actually advertising their toxicity. And so if they detect the bat, if they hear a bat coming, they can actually produce their own clicks. And if a bat has ever eaten one of these toxic moths and been sick, then it might think, "Oh, that's right, the last time I heard that, I ended up getting sick, and after I ate it." So then they can avoid it. So if you think about it, during the day, there's warning coloration. A lot of animals, especially insects and things like amphibians, newts, things like that, right, have warning coloration with bright orange or bright black. But at night, colors aren't really easily seen. And so the ability to create these sounds can really help deter the bats from eating these moths. And then some species, like tiger moths and sphinx moths, not only can hear a bat coming, not only can they produce sound, but they can produce sounds at a really high frequency. So like these moths can produce like 4,500 clicks per second, and they're actually jamming the sonar of the bats. So they're actually interfering with the bat's ability to locate them. It just sort of confuses their process of echolocation. And it's been shown that these species really do avoid being captured because of this, which is pretty incredible. Okay, so it's Halloween, so we just kind of have to dive a little bit deeper into bats. So bats are in the order Chiroptera. This is their taxonomic grouping. And Chiro means hand and Ptera means wing. And so basically their taxonomic name means hand wing. And if you think of a chiropractor, they are a practitioner that uses their hands to heal. That's where that name comes from. So anyway, if you look at the bones, they look like the skeleton, like the bones in our hands, right? And indeed they are. So very similar structure, but of course it's covered by skin, this membrane. And in this photo, you can see their little thumbs sticking out. And so they can actually use those thumbs to help them scramble over things, to crawl, to grab onto things. And of course, they can fly, right? But they are the only mammal that's capable of sustained flight. And so not only are they able to fly around in the dark, but they're also able to maneuver into places that other animals can't really take advantage of. So they are foraging at night and exploiting a niche that nobody else is really filling in the dark. And then they're also able to use places to roost, to spend the night, to sleep, and to overwinter, where no other animals are using them. And so not only are they able to exploit these unused areas, but also they're up off the ground. So if you're a bat and you're hanging out on the roof of a cave, there are very few predators that can get to you. So it's really also helping them avoid ground predators. But if you think about it, if we were to hang upside down for hours or even months, all of the blood would rush to our head. So the adult human, it has about 2 pounds of blood, that gravity is moving around. And so if we were to hang upside down, we'd probably get a headache. If we got up really quickly, we'd get a head rush. And so if you think about, bats have to, hang upside down a lot. And does that affect their blood pressure and the way blood is moving in their bodies? So it turns out that they weigh so little that gravity doesn't have a strong enough pull to do that. So that's not really an issue for them. But how are they hanging by their feet? How are they sleeping like this? If you think about it, if you were to grab onto something, and even if you had super strong hands and you could hang there for a while, if you fell asleep, your muscles would relax and you would fall, right? So how are bats able to hang on while they're sleeping? So it turns out that they're not using muscles to grab on. What they're actually doing is they have tendons that are attached to their feet and attached to their upper body. And so as long as they can sort of get traction and somewhere that their claws can hang on to, some sort of texture, basically they let gravity just pull them down, and then the tendon pulls their feet shut. And so it's actually not through the muscles that they're closing their feet, it's through tendons, and then they lock. And so they have to use muscles to release, to open up their feet once they want to fly away or if they want to move around. But as long as they're just hanging there, those tendons are locked. And so they're not actually exerting energy while they're hanging there. And in fact, if a bat dies while it's hanging upside down, it will just remain hanging upside down unless eventually something, a wind blows it out of a tree or something, or another bat might jostle it out of position. So this is kind of a little bit hard to understand, but basically you've got the claw at the top, and then you see this tendon is attached. And if you look at that sort of rough patch on the tendon, you can see how, if you look at the blue arrow, that would be the pull of the body, the weight of the body pulling down on that tendon, and then it kind of locks into place and it pulls the claw over. So this means that all they have to do, they're hanging upside down. And so in order to take flight, all they have to do is activate their muscles, release their talon, and boom, they're in flight. They don't have to take off. They don't have to flap their wings or anything. And so they literally just fall into flight. And so this can be really good for bats because they don't have long legs. They don't have strong feet, so they can't do a running takeoff. And they aren't like birds. They aren't able to flap their wings and take off. And so if a bat is down on the ground, it can have a hard time taking off. But they're really good climbers. And remember, I pointed out those little thumbs. So they can actually usually climb back up to a higher surface and then take off. So they're pretty agile that way. So they can get up high, take off, and drift off into the night to go, trick or treat or something like that. So happy Halloween, everyone. And that's it. And I'm going to pass it over to Shireen to take over on the questions.
Well, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will read them out. Right now, we're getting a lot of great thank yous. And the one question that came in was about the photographer, and his name is, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but I looked him up. It's Alex. Will you pronounce his last name, Shannon?
I think it's Badiev,
Okay.
something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't heard it.
He's a professor at the University of Arizona. And I'm sure you can find more of his photographs online, but they are just astounding.
Yeah. And so I'll just add a little thing. Yeah. So as I mentioned, he's an evolutionary biologist and also an amazing photographer. And it's just really interesting to think about how those two intertwine. And I read an article by him where he talks about that doing one lends itself to the other and vice versa.
Yeah. So there is, first question that I can find is, how do scientists figure out that animals do echolocation? I was wondering that too, like how are some of these phenomena studied?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they are, I know that we can't hear the noises that bats make, but you can buy a little machine that can. And so in some cases, they may be testing animals that are navigating in the dark and seeing if it shows on the screen. They also might be looking at their brains. I know that some studies have been done actually looking at the use of echolocation in humans who have vision issues like blindness. And I don't know much about it, but I know that they compared what part of the brain was being stimulated, and it's the same in bats and in humans. And in humans, it's related to how we perceive vision. So it's kind of a part of the brain that perceives sensory input from the environment in different ways, whether it's through hearing or vision in different animals. So they might be looking at what parts of the brain are stimulated with these noises. Beyond that, I'm not sure.
Something to look up for all of us. So another question or request is, can you please explain sustained flight again?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So to differentiate between like a bat, regarding mammals, bats are capable of sustained flight, meaning that they can keep themselves aloft. They're flapping their wings once they're in the air, and they are able to fly around. They're able to maneuver. They are able to have directed flight. They can go up, they can go down, all of these things. There are some other mammals that kind of fly, like flying squirrels, but they're actually more gliding. And so they are using parts of their body like flaps of skin, and they're taking advantage of air being captured underneath that, but they are susceptible to gravity. Like basically they only glide and they eventually are being pulled down. So where bats are more like birds, where they can actually have directed flight and it can last for a long time.
Thank you. So someone has thanks you for such a great, fascinating presentation, especially about bats. And they have a great question. How do bats not deafen other bats when clicking?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know, it may, yeah, that's a great question. And so for the most part, they're making these really ultrasonic, these really high pitches when they're out foraging. And so it may be that they're just not in close enough proximity would potentially be a guess, if they're flying around. Bats communicate with each other through clicks, but it tends to be at a lower frequency. Sometimes even I've actually, there's this bridge in Austin, Texas, that has all of these Mexican free-tailed bats. And I was able to hear some noises when I was there, but so that would probably be communication between bats, and especially like mothers communicating with their offspring will use sound. Yeah, so I'm not sure about the answer to that, but I'm guessing that it has to do with the frequency and the proximity, just that they may not be close enough when they're making those high-pitched noises.
The next question is, have any studies been conducted analyzing the effects of wireless technologies on echolocation?
I don't know. Interesting question.
Yeah, I guess, are we jamming their frequencies essentially? You're interfering with their communication.
Yeah, and I'm not like a techie person, so I'm not sure if it's a different type of wave that's being used,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but it's an interesting concept.
It is,
just,
absolutely.
how we might be altering.
Another way that humans are, making noises to interfere with animals.
Exactly. Well, I think, any more questions? Fascinating listeners? A lot of wonderful thank yous, appreciation for the humor. Oh, what is the name of the YouTube channel? That's for me. So just go to YouTube and type in Marin County Free Library, and it comes right up. And you can see a lot of Shannon's previous talks there too, all wonderful. So, and they've gotten a lot of views. So I would suggest that in the 2 weeks that you're waiting for this one to
actually, I'll just add on one thing. If you want another sort of Halloween themed educational sort of talk like this, I don't normally do this, but I think there's one on the Marin Library YouTube channel on spider silk. So you could look up, once you're on YouTube, maybe look up Marin Free Library spider silk or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great suggestion. I forgot about your spider talks. They were so popular. Well, I think with that, I'm just going to echo the thank yous. It was a really fascinating lecture, and I loved all the diagrams. That was really instructional to me, as I imagine for everyone else. So with that, I will thank you again, Shannon, and thanks to a wonderful listener audience, and wish everyone a very happy and safe and fun Halloween. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Shireen, and thanks to everyone. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Bye-bye.